The only thing better than learning from your own mistakes is learning from someone else's. So here they are. Social media these days seems to be all about selling your own successes. Everywhere you go, someone is trying to sell you the secret of their amazing overnight success. For just $10.99.99, you could get access to the full Morgan Quaid Marketing Genius Tactical Enlightenment Strategy Program. Offer not to be taken seriously. Personally, I think the whole overnight success myth is one of the most damaging things for up-and-coming creators. For the most part, it's a lie, and it's selling unrealistic expectations about an industry that can be incredibly tough. But you won't get any of that overnight success stuff from me, friends. No, just grueling heartache, a life of endless toil and misery. Too much? Okay, well, before we get onto the mistakes, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell. So here are some of the mistakes I've made as an indie comic creator. These aren't all the mistakes I've made, just some choice pickings. Hopefully they can be instructive and help you avoid a little heartache of your own. We'll start with a simple one I've mentioned before. When I first started writing comics, I used way too many words, way too much dialogue, way too much exposition. Comics, for me at least, are all about showcasing artwork to enhance your story, not drowning the page in text. Coming from writing novels though, it was a little bit tricky to learn that one, and I'm still working on it. As I've progressed though, I've learnt to let the artwork speak as much as possible and tailor my words to the format of a comic rather than just writing everything that I can to try and get the message across. More panels equals more artwork, which is better, right? Not necessarily. Writing scripts with 8 to 12 panels per page might seem like a great idea, but the resulting artwork will likely be too dense, your artist is probably going to hate you, and in doing this, you're taking away the medium's ability to draw readers into the story by having them constantly shift from panel to panel to panel. As with everything, variation is the key. You might have the odd page which does have 12 panels, just like you might have a splash page or a page with 2 panels. Work with your artist and land on a happy medium, but going for 3 to 6 panels might be a better place to start than 12 or 13 or 20. Now, I work with artists from all over the world, and that sometimes means working with artists for whom English isn't their native language. That often adds a little bit more back and forth to the discussion because certain idioms like raining cats and dogs and so on don't translate, and I need to do a little bit more work communicating to the artist exactly what I'm trying to get across. One great example of this was when I was working with an amazing artist from overseas. I went to the artist and said, "Could you please put glasses on one of the protagonists in the story?" He happily obliged, then sent back the page, but there were no glasses on the character. I looked very hard for a long time, but I could not find those glasses. But eventually what I did find was a glass of water on the table in front of the character. Now, we both had a good laugh about it and it wasn't the end of the world, but these kinds of miscommunications can definitely suck up time and potentially money. So make sure you communicate as clearly as possible with your artist. Add pictures to your script if necessary and check with the artist that your message has gotten across clearly. Now this one is very, very specific, but I think worth mentioning. For indie artists, postage is a big deal, particularly if you're regularly crowdfunding to support your books. Fluctuations in postage pricing can be the difference between breaking even or not, and it can really put a sour taste in your mouth. This is doubly the case for someone like me who lives in Australia. For my first campaign, I raised the funds with a crowdfunding campaign, printed the books in the USA, shipped them to Australia, and then predominantly posted them back to backers in the US. Needless to say, I didn't make any money on that campaign. If you're going to be sending your books to people that are largely overseas, think carefully about where you're getting your books printed and where you're getting them posted from. And don't make my mistake, kids. Do it once, do it right. Don't double post. Now, let me be clear, I love artists. They're amazing and I'm constantly in awe of their talent. But for an indie creator, a great artist is more than just someone that draws incredibly well. It's also about how they price their work. It's about how reliable they are in meeting deadlines and how well they communicate with you. I'll be doing another video on the topic of building and working with a creative team, but for now, suffice it to say that I've had more than one experience of paying full price for artwork for a book that I consequently ended up waiting months and even years to be fully completed. That kind of delay can literally kill your project, particularly if you're working with a publisher. There's no easy answer to this one other than trying to vet your artist well before you start a project and form long-term relationships with those artists that you trust and who have proven themselves to be reliable. For those that are less than reliable, try and get out of them whatever you can, but it's usually best to part ways rather than continually paying for substandard work or work that is delivered far past the due date. Coming from novel writing, it was quite a transition for me to move to comics. To begin with, at least, I found it difficult to write contained story arcs that didn't spill over into many issues. Having a series with 20 issues or so might sound amazing, epic, but it's a ludicrous financial investment, and sustaining a creative team over the duration of the build is incredibly difficult to do. The longer your story arc is, the more likely you are to run into problems like this: running out of money to pay for the artwork, readers losing interest in your project because it takes too long for you to get all of the issues out, having to change the artist midway through a series and that impacting on the quality and the consistency of the work, realizing halfway through producing the series that your book really isn't selling well, but there are enough supporters that you don't want to just drop it. So consequently, you keep running with a series that's no longer financially viable. Now, as I've mentioned in other videos, having a shorter story arc with a small number of issues is a lot more manageable, and there's a lot better guarantee that you'll be able to get the work done. Now, this is very appealing to an indie publisher, as well as being easier for you to manage. I've learned the hard way that having a massive story arc is typically a pathway to misery and frustration. Okay, so for legal reasons, I obviously cannot name names here, but I will say that early on I signed an incredibly unfair contract with a publisher, which consequently cost me thousands of dollars, effectively buried one of my first and best comic stories, and left me wallowing for about 2 years without a way to get my work out there to readers. Yes, I read the contract thoroughly. Yes, I knew it was a bad contract, the kind of contract where you've basically got no hope of ever making any money and where you're effectively signing over the rights of your work to people you've just met. I knew all of this, but I was desperate to get my work out there and justified the idea that I wouldn't make any money on this comic by insisting that building a name for myself was more important at that stage in my creative journey. Since that time, I've invested in hiring a lawyer, and I've gotten a lot smarter with contracts and a lot more wary of publishers. In many ways, having this bad experience right at the start of my journey has been incredibly valuable, teaching me a hard lesson which has helped me avoid other pitfalls with other publishers and contracts. But if you can avoid mistakes like this, please do that. Don't rush into signing a contract just because you're desperate to get your name out there. There are much better options for indie creators these days. You can build out your first comic, run a crowdfunding campaign, start building your fan base, all without having to sign a contract with a publisher. Now, let me be clear, there are some amazing indie publishers out there and some great people who work for those publishers. I've been fortunate enough to sign with a few different publishers and found that they provide a much better experience than my first disastrous foray into indie comic publishing. The key thing here is to never ever sign a contract which gives over all of your rights to a publisher or which basically guarantees you'll never make a cent out of your book. Spend a little money, hire yourself a lawyer, and get them to review and give an honest appraisal of the contract before you think of signing it. Remind yourself that signing a bad contract could effectively bury your book altogether. That idea should scare you enough to make you consider the contract closely and clearly before making any decisions. I'll have a more detailed video on working with indie publishers dropping shortly, but for now, let my experience serve as a warning. I lost a lot of money and time, heaped a lot of stress on myself through this whole process, and if you can avoid it, please do. Well, this wasn't an exhaustive list of mistakes that I've made in my comic creation journey, but it does include a few big ones. Hopefully it's been instructive. Subscribe and hit the bell, and as always, keep it real, keep it safe.